Chaplain Dillard initiates creating and posting these videos. Their contents and YouTube's linked videos do not necessarily reflect specific beliefs, practices, requirements, or endorsements of the Department of Defense, its subordinate organizations, or other groups with which Chaplain Dillard is affiliated.
Welcome back. If you have not seen the introduction to this series, I would encourage you to watch that. It is it's foundational. I won't cover the basics, but you really need to understand why it's important to understand personality before you can buy in to what we're going to cover next. And that is an introduction to Carl Jung's approach to personality types. Carl Jung, you can look up for yourself online. I won't go into all of who he was or what he did, but he did popularize the approach to personality types. And our first point that Jung makes is that individuation is a struggle to balance our identity as self and part of the group. That's the bottom line for Carl Jung, and the foundation of understanding personality types is that all of us struggle to identify as a self. Who am I? I am unique, but I'm also part of you. I'm part of a family, I'm part of a work team, I'm part of a neighborhood, I'm part of this social group. I'm not the same as you, but there are some things that make me a part of you. And how do we balance that out? What makes us fit in? What makes us different? Carl Jung called that individuation, and he called it a struggle. It is a struggle because there are times that we need to fit in and work well and identify with how we belong. There are other times that we need to stand apart and to see that our uniqueness is good and brings about more than if we were exactly synonymous with all the members of the other group. Which takes us to our second point. Most of our struggle is around the dynamics of information. Now, there are many different types of personality instruments out there, or tests, but most of them are based on Carl Jung's philosophy or approach to individuation, and that is generally about information. Why we want information? Is it to understand, which was later called perceiving, or to decide, which the instrument calls judging? Why do you want the information? Chances are you fall on one of two extremes. Now, if you're pretty centered, you see the equal validity of both of these. I need to understand and I need to make a decision. But many of us are more toward one side or the other. Perceivers, the P's, are often called procrastinating pigs because their desk is in disarray. They're always looking for more information. They've got it all laid out so they can see it. It's very important for them to perceive patterns, to understand how things fit together. Sometimes judgers, which is not to be confused with judgmental, judgers want to decide, and they're often seen as rushing to task, as being insensitive, as being overachievers, wanting to make a decision, and pushy to others to make that decision as well. Both spectrums are needed. We need to understand and we need to make a decision, but we often value one a little bit more than the other. The second aspect of information is, where do we glean that information? By our senses or by our gut or intuition? Most of us will lean more to one side or the other. The old Jack Webb saying in Dragnet, just the facts, man. That's somebody who looks at their intuition. What do my eyes see? What do I hear? What can I touch? What do I smell? What's it taste like? Those things will tell me what the truth is. Others deal more with their gut, past experience. They might not be able to articulate it as well, but based on their personal experience in the world, they have almost a sixth sense. They can say, they will say, I can't tell you exactly why, but this is what I think is most important. And because those people are so in touch with the inexpressible nuances of a situation, they can bring something to the table that our fifth senses can't pick up on. The third aspect of information and personality type is how we weigh that information, by logic, which is thinking, or by its impact on others in relationship, which is feeling. Those who emphasize logic are often seen as insensitive. Those who emphasize feeling or relationships are often seen as mushy-gushy, and you're not paying attention to what is most logical or rational. But both are needed, because we have to deal with the facts. We have to make decisions that make sense, but those decisions usually involve relationships. Again, we tend to lean more to one side or the other. You might be exactly center, but that would be rare. You're probably a little bit to one side or the other, or maybe even to an extreme. The fourth area of information is who receives that information. Is it others, which would be extroversion, or is it ourself, which is introversion? Another way of expressing that area is, where do we get our energy? Is it from other people or from being more to ourselves with just a few relationships? All of us tend to be a little on one side or the other. You might be exactly in the middle, but that would be rare. And again, the importance of this is we need to understand that we are different from others. Let's go ahead and take a look at our next point, and we'll expound on that a little more. The potential pairing of different complements within these four areas results in 16 different types. You can look up the 16 different types, and there are websites with that name. I'm not necessarily espousing that one of the websites is more valid than others. It's just numerically the case that when you take four areas and two different complements in each area, there are 16 different types that you can come up with. And there are even descriptions of those 16 different types, and you can look at them after you've taken an instrument. And although the instrument, depending on which one you use, may be exceptionally valid and reliable, others not as much, you should look until you can say, yeah, that's me. That's me right there. And that's my oldest son. And this is my wife. Now, having said that, personality is in formation for many years. And I don't want to say that we should label and say that's the way you should be, but it's exceptionally risky and unhelpful to say to a developing child, this is who they are. Especially if they are in their younger years or a teenager. A lot of times personality is really not set until the later teen years, sometimes even the early 20s, because they're still growing through many formative experiences in the subculture of their family, in the subculture of their area, their religion, politics, etc., etc. Only when they get out and begin to become their own person do they tend to get more set in a personality type. Myers and Briggs were a mother-daughter team that were greatly influenced by Carl Jung's philosophy or his articulation of psychology, and they took this and applied it to how do we identify different personality or character types in terms of the jobs that would fit them best in the World War II era. So a very practical application, and it should be no surprise that we use this a lot in the military because it was originally formatted for a time of finding jobs in a very prominent military era of World War II. All right, enough vague psychology and philosophy. Let's try to be as specific and practical as we can. A good place to start is with defining dominant functions and how those are related to the P and the J. The perceiving dominant function is always about gleaning information, sensing or intuition. Now, what does that mean? Myers and Briggs said these four aspects of personality are called functions, and each one relates to either perceiving or judging. I'm a P. Every time I take the Myers-Briggs or Kiersey-Bates or 16 personality types, I always come out to be an INTP. That's me. My wife, every time she takes it, turns out to be the exact opposite, ESFJ. Now, as a P, and that's where you really need to start, the last letter of your Myers-Briggs profile, Ps are always concerned with the function of gathering information, either through the five senses or through intuition. And again, every time I take it, I turn out to be an intuitive. Not terribly extreme. I can live in the sensory world, gathering information from the Jack Webb approach. Just give me the facts, ma'am, if you remember Dragnet. But it's less comfortable to me and less preferable. I'd rather be an N. My wife, on the other hand, because she's a J, it's either going to be T or F, and with her, every time she takes it, she turns out to be an F fairly strongly because she's concerned about relationships. She wants to make decisions that are beneficial to relationships. I want to understand, and I rely on my gut. They're complementary. We make a very good team, although in the beginning we were very frustrating and confusing to each other because we thought the other was just being stubborn or lazy. Now that we've found out that we're complementary and just different, we've learned how to be synergistic in our relationship. A third point is about introversion and extraversion. Introverts prefer to use their dominant function within themselves. Now, what does that mean? Well, if we go back to my wife and I'm going to make a square here for me, because guys are kind of hard-nosed, like the sharp edge of a square, generally, not always. Circles for the nice curves of the ladies. Hope that's not offensive to anybody. I find that quite attractive. I tend to introvert my dominant function of intuition, which means I like to step back from the crowd and to reflect within my sixth sense to process meaning. My wife likes to extrovert her feeling, which means she likes to step into the family, step into the crowd of her colleagues and others, and make decisions that benefit relationships. My dominant function is introverted intuition. Hers is extroverted feeling. So we tend to take our dominant function and combine it with where we get energy and where we want to direct that energy. That's how we define our dominant function. Our secondary go-to is the complementary function in the opposite direction. Now, what does that mean? Well, you may remember that I like to introvert my intuition. My secondary go-to is for me to extrovert my sensing, because I still want to understand. That's still my primary goal, is to make sense of things. And so the opposite direction of that for me is extroversion. Think of it like a pendulum. I'm always wanting to understand. Now if I switch it this way, I usually introvert, but I can also extrovert, still wanting to understand, because I can only live in the extreme for so long before I get tired and need to move in a different direction, or I find out this is not working and I need to swing to what does work. So this is primary for me, introverted, intuitive, or dominant. Secondary for me is extroverted sensing. In a similar way, my wife, her primary was extroverted feeling, you may remember that, but she can't always live there. She still wants to decide, so she can move to the thinking world. Here, let me circle my curvy wife, and she can go introverted. She has to sometimes step back from the crowd and stop thinking so much about how people feel, but she still wants to make a decision. She steps back and she considers what is most logical, because she can't live in the extreme forever. All right, 2 more points and we'll wrap this up. First, each of us lives in all of the other combinations, but to lesser extents. I can be an EJ, I can be an IJ, I can be an IT or an IS, I can be an ET, an ES, an EF, an E. I have lots and lots of possibilities, but I haven't experienced as much success in those. I haven't poured as much time into those, and so I'm not equally as good at those, and we tend to do what we do well. Now, I happen to eat left-handed because my mom put my fork on the left-hand side of my plate. I figured that's where you're supposed to grab it from, and I picked it up and ate that way. I'm not ambidextrous. I play pool left-handed, I play racquetball and tennis with either hand, not terribly well, but equally bad with both hands, because I just learned to do it. But usually we spend more time as an extrovert, introvert, thinker, feeler, sensor, intuitive, decision maker, or perceiver, and we do the other things to a lesser degree. The last point. Like pendulums, the more we live in any direction, the more we crave balance. So if my intuition is a little over here, or my sensing is a little over here, I can move, and hardly anybody notices the difference because it's such a small change. It's like being in the middle of that racquetball court or tennis court or handball court. It's just a small shift in order to play other parts of the court. But if I live to an extreme, 8 hours a day at work, I'm probably going to swing hard the other way at home. I am an introvert. My job requires me to be an extrovert. So when I go home, I really have to fight against being more of an introvert at home because I didn't have a chance to do it at work. And I have to go to my family and spend time with them one-on-one, because that's still introversion for me. It's not the big crowd, it's more one-on-one. You may have similar challenges. If you live in the extreme of feeling, always concerned about relationships, that can be overwhelming, and you may swing hard to be more logical in other circumstances. We need to understand that all of us need balance. And so over the years, as I mentioned in a previous video, we can mitigate our extremes by learning to work in other fields, but we can still leverage our strengths because we have a history of being good at introversion, or good at thinking, or good at our intuition, or making decisions. So it can be the best of both worlds. The question is, what is helpful to your team and what is honorable? If we can keep those things in mind, we will learn to make the most of who we are, give the best of who we are to our teams, and allow them to help us grow outside of our comfort zone. I hope this series is being helpful and hopeful to you so far. Next week we will look at some myths about personality types and how the answer to those myths, or answers to those myths, can bring us even more practical help in our relationships. Then we will conclude with a fourth video setting up some practical exercises, some games, and talking through some vignettes as I three-dimensionally picture in a room examples of the 16 different personality types. We won't actually do the games or talk through the vignettes in the video. This is just saving some face-to-face training time, so as I go spend time training some of my folks who are spread out around the world, we can focus just on the practical exercises, having done the training online. Hope that makes sense. Hope that's helpful. Hope to see you next week.
At the release date of this video, I am stationed with Research, Development, and Engineering Command, RDECOM, at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Because the majority of our personnel are in this area, I spend most of my time here. I do, however, travel to our distant units based on command priorities and budget. I place these videos on YouTube for broad visibility to Army personnel and their families, but I hope the videos will be helpful to others too. If you are assigned to RDECOM and want to request specific topics by video, training on site or by VTC, or confidential counseling on site or by secure webcam, you can contact me at jeffrey.d.dillard.mil@mail.mil.